Have you ever had the terrifying feeling that the people sitting around your dinner table weren't wondering how long you'd live, they were wondering how much they'd get when you were gone? What would you do if you accidentally heard your own family discussing your house, your savings, your investments, and even your funeral while your heart was still beating? Would you confront them? Would you scream? Or would you smile and quietly let them believe they'd already won? Welcome to Stories for You. Get comfortable. This story is going to take you somewhere. Hit that like button and drop a comment below letting me know where you are watching from. Trust me, you're going to love it here. Let me back up. I've always believed that money doesn't change people. It simply removes the mask they've been wearing all along. It took me 74 years to learn that lesson, and by the time I did, the people I loved had already started measuring my life in dollars instead of memories. My name is Harold. I spent 46 years building a construction company with my own hands. I wasn't born into wealth. I earned every penny the hard way. Before sunrise, after sunset, through recessions, broken machinery, bad backs, and winters so cold my hands bled through my work gloves. My wife, Linda, stood beside me for most of those years. Together we raised 2 children, celebrated birthdays around the same kitchen table, watched grandchildren fill the house with laughter, and convinced ourselves that everything we'd built would one day become the foundation of a family that stayed close. That's the dream, isn't it? You spend your younger years sacrificing so your children won't have to. You skip vacations to pay for college. You drive the same old truck for 15 years so your family never has to worry about the mortgage. You tell yourself that one day they'll remember the love behind every sacrifice. I believed that with all my heart. Looking back now, I wonder exactly when gratitude quietly turned into expectation. It wasn't obvious at first. No family falls apart overnight. It happens one small conversation at a time. One uncomfortable silence. One glance you weren't supposed to notice. One joke that isn't really a joke. Linda started asking unusual questions. Do you still remember all the passwords? You've organized the investment accounts, haven't you? Maybe you should simplify everything. At your age, paperwork gets confusing. She smiled every time she asked. I smiled back. After 50 years of marriage, you don't assume the worst because someone asks about paperwork. Then my oldest son, Daniel, started bringing up retirement communities every few weeks. Just keeping options open, Dad. My daughter, Melissa, suddenly became interested in my estate planning. Nobody lives forever, she'd laugh. Neither conversation seemed strange by itself. Together, they started feeling heavier. Still, I ignored that little voice in the back of my mind. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe getting older makes you suspicious. Maybe I was becoming exactly the stubborn old man everyone jokes about. Then came my granddaughter Emma's birthday dinner. The whole family filled the house. Laughter echoed through every room. Wrapping paper covered the living room floor. Cameras flashed. The grandchildren ran through the hallway while Linda kept reminding everyone to eat before the food got cold. It looked like the kind of evening every father hopes for. I even remember standing in the kitchen thinking how lucky I was. If only I'd gone straight back to the dining room. Instead, I realized I'd left my reading glasses upstairs. It's funny how ordinary decisions change entire lives. As I came back down the staircase, I heard voices drifting from my study. The door wasn't completely closed. I recognized Daniel first. The house alone has to be worth at least $2 million now. Another voice answered. Melissa. And that's before the investment accounts. Someone laughed. A quiet laugh. Linda's laugh. I stopped halfway down the hallway. Not because I wanted to listen. Because my feet simply refused to move. Daniel spoke again. We should probably sell the house right away. None of us needs something this big. Melissa replied almost casually. I already looked at comparable properties online. Already looked. Not if. Not someday. Already. Every word landed harder than the last. Then Linda spoke so calmly it almost sounded practical. We'll have to be patient. Patient. As though they were waiting for a delayed package instead of the man who had spent his entire life loving them. I felt something inside me crack. Not loudly. Quietly. Like old wood splitting under too much weight. For a moment I almost pushed the door open. I almost walked inside and demanded an explanation. But something stopped me. People tell the truth when they think no one's listening. If I interrupted now, I'd only hear excuses. If I stayed silent, I might finally hear the truth. So I remained perfectly still, holding my breath while my own family continued planning a future they thought would begin without me. And then Daniel said 7 words that erased every doubt I'd been trying to ignore. He doesn't have much time anyway. Those 7 words stayed with me long after the birthday candles had been blown out. He doesn't have much time anyway. It wasn't just what Daniel said. It was how easily he said it. No hesitation. No sadness. No guilt. Just a simple statement, as if he were commenting on tomorrow's weather. I stood in that hallway for another minute, maybe 2. Long enough to hear chairs scrape across the hardwood floor as they prepared to leave my study. Long enough to realize I couldn't let them see my face. So I quietly walked back upstairs, picked up the reading glasses I'd almost forgotten, and waited until I heard everyone return to the living room. When I finally came downstairs, I smiled, joked with the grandchildren, helped cut the birthday cake, and even posed for family pictures. If you looked at those photographs today, you'd never know that the man standing in the middle had just watched his family divide his life into percentages. That night, after everyone left, Linda loaded the dishwasher while I wiped down the kitchen counters. For nearly 50 years, that had been our routine. Comfortable. Predictable. Familiar. She finally looked over at me and smiled. "You seemed quiet tonight." "I was just tired," I answered. She nodded without another question. That surprised me. For decades, Linda could tell when something was bothering me before I even spoke. She'd sit beside me with a cup of coffee and refuse to leave until I opened up. Tonight, she didn't seem interested. It was as though my silence had become convenient. I lay awake most of the night, staring at the ceiling. Every conversation from the past year replayed itself in my mind, only now I heard it differently. Daniel insisting I didn't need such a large investment portfolio. Melissa offering to help organize my financial files. Linda suggesting that maybe I should put all my accounts into one place where they would be easier for everyone. At the time, I'd thought they were trying to make life simpler for me. Now I wondered, who was everyone? The next morning, I decided not to confront anyone. Anger makes people defensive. Silence makes people comfortable. Comfortable people reveal far more than angry ones. Over the next several weeks, I became the quietest man in my own house. I listened more than I spoke. And what I heard changed everything. Daniel started dropping by every Friday. Not to ask how I was feeling. Not to share a meal. Always with another financial suggestion. "Dad, have you thought about putting me on one of your accounts? Just in case of emergencies." I smiled. "I'll think about it." He seemed satisfied. Melissa called more often than she had in years. "Just checking on you, Dad." But somehow every conversation drifted toward the same subjects. Insurance. Property taxes. Investment statements. The house. Always the house. Even Linda became strangely interested in my filing cabinet. One afternoon I walked into my office unexpectedly and found her standing in front of it. She jumped when she saw me. I was just looking for the warranty papers for the washing machine. That might have sounded believable if the washing machine hadn't been replaced 3 years earlier. I said nothing. She closed the drawer. We both pretended everything was normal. A week later, my younger son, Michael, stopped by. Unlike his brother, Michael rarely asked for anything. He worked as a high school history teacher, drove an aging pickup truck that rattled every time it started, and always seemed more interested in hearing stories than discussing money. He sat with me on the back porch, sipping iced tea while watching the sun settle behind the trees. "You okay, Dad?" I looked at him. It was such a simple question, but something about the way he asked it was different. He wasn't looking past me. He wasn't distracted. He was actually looking at me. "I've been better," I admitted. He nodded. "You know, if you ever need anything, you don't have to carry it alone." That sentence nearly broke me. Because in a family full of people asking what I owned, he was the only one asking how I was. I almost told him everything I'd overheard. Almost. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. Instead, I changed the subject. As Michael left, he hugged me tighter than usual. "Love you, Dad." "I love you too." When his truck disappeared down the road, I realized something important. Not everyone in my family had failed me, but I still didn't know who I could trust completely. That answer came 3 days later. Every Tuesday morning, I had breakfast at the same little diner I'd been visiting for almost 20 years. The waitresses knew my name. They knew I liked my coffee black and my eggs over easy. It was one of the few places where nobody cared how much money I had. That morning, as I paid my bill, someone called my name. "Harold." I turned around. Standing near the entrance was Thomas Reynolds, my attorney. We'd worked together for more than 30 years. He handled the sale of my company, my retirement planning, and every legal document I'd ever signed. After a firm handshake, we sat down with fresh cups of coffee. He smiled. "It's been too long." It has. For a few minutes, we talked about ordinary things. Fishing, baseball, retirement. Then his expression changed. He leaned forward slightly. "I got an interesting phone call last week." I felt my stomach tighten. "From who?" He held my eyes for a long moment before answering. "Someone in your family wanted to know how difficult it would be to challenge your will." My coffee suddenly tasted bitter. I hadn't told anyone who my attorney was. So had they found him? And more importantly, who had called? For a second, I couldn't speak. The sounds of the diner faded into the background. Plates clinked. Someone laughed near the front counter. The waitress topped off another customer's coffee. Life went on as if nothing had happened. But inside me, everything had just shifted again. Thomas didn't rush me. He'd spent decades reading people across conference tables and courtrooms. He knew when silence carried more weight than words. Finally, I managed to ask, "Did they say who they were?" He slowly shook his head. "They introduced themselves as a family member. They didn't give a name. They asked general questions at first. Then they became very specific." "Specific how?" "They wanted to know whether your current will could be contested if someone claimed you weren't mentally competent when you signed it." My fingers tightened around the coffee mug. Mental competence. It was the same path I'd seen other families take. You didn't have to prove an elderly parent was confused. You only had to create enough doubt for everyone else to start questioning them. Thomas continued carefully. "I didn't answer anything beyond reminding them that attorney-client privilege exists. Then I called you, but your voicemail was full." I let out a slow breath. I never got the message. I figured as much. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Thomas looked directly at me. "Harold, is there something you need to tell me?" That question opened a door I'd been holding shut ever since Emma's birthday. So I told him. Not everything. Just enough. I told him about the conversation outside my study. About hearing my children discuss the value of the house. About Linda's voice. About Daniel's words. He doesn't have much time anyway. Thomas didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he folded his hands on the table. "I've seen this before." Those 5 words chilled me. "You have?" "More times than I'd like." He sighed. "Families don't usually fall apart over money. They fall apart over what money reveals. Greed simply speeds up the process." I stared out the diner's window. I keep asking myself where I went wrong. Thomas immediately shook his head. "Don't." "What do you mean?" "Parents always blame themselves first. Sometimes that's fair. Most of the time it isn't. Children grow into adults who make their own choices." His words settled somewhere deep inside me. For weeks, I'd been searching my past for mistakes. Had I spoiled them? Given them too much? Protected them too often? Maybe, maybe not. But regardless of the answer, their decisions still belonged to them. Thomas reached into his briefcase and placed a thin folder on the table. "Your current estate plan is solid." I looked down at it. "I signed that almost 8 years ago." "I know." He paused. "But people change." I understood exactly what he meant. "So do families." "I don't want revenge," I said quietly. Thomas nodded. "I didn't think you did." I just... The words caught in my throat. "I want the truth." He leaned back. "Then don't force it." "What?" Let people keep believing whatever they already believe. I frowned. I don't understand. If someone thinks you're unaware, they become careless. That sentence stayed with me. Careless. People hiding something eventually stop hiding it if they believe nobody's watching. When we left the diner, Thomas shook my hand. If you decide you want to review your will, call me. I will. But don't wait too long. Driving home, I didn't turn on the radio. I needed silence. Not the painful kind. The useful kind. For the first time since that birthday dinner, I stopped thinking like a wounded father. I started thinking like a man trying to understand the people around him. That afternoon, I began paying attention to details I'd ignored for years. Daniel suddenly knew exactly when my investment statements arrived in the mail. Melissa somehow always asked about property values after neighborhood homes sold. Linda started encouraging me to take it easy whenever bills or financial paperwork came up. You've earned a rest, she'd say. Funny. She'd never tried to take those responsibilities away from me before. Then something happened that removed any remaining doubt. A week later, I came home earlier than expected after lunch with an old friend. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Daniel's SUV parked beside the garage. He hadn't mentioned visiting. The front door wasn't locked. I stepped inside quietly. The house was unusually silent. Then I heard voices upstairs. My bedroom. I climbed the stairs without making a sound. The bedroom door was slightly open. Inside, Linda stood beside our closet while Daniel carefully searched through the shelves where I kept old tax returns, insurance documents, and personal files. Drawers were open. Boxes sat on the floor. My private papers were spread across the bed. Linda whispered, "He'll be home soon." Daniel didn't even look up. "I just need to find the latest copy. The lawyer probably has it." "I know, but if Dad kept one here, it'll save us time." Save us time. Not if something happens. Not one day. Now they were actively searching for my will. I should have walked in. I should have demanded an explanation. Instead, I quietly backed away before they ever knew I was home. 10 minutes later, I opened the front door loudly enough for them to hear. "Linda? I'm back." By the time they came downstairs, every drawer upstairs had been closed. Daniel smiled as though nothing had happened. "Hated. Just stopped by to check on you." I smiled back. "That's thoughtful." For the first time in my life, lying to my own family came naturally. Because now I understood something they didn't. They believed they were one step ahead of me. In reality, they had just shown me exactly what game they were playing. And that night, sitting alone in my study, I unlocked the small fireproof safe hidden behind a shelf of old photo albums. Inside were the original copy of my will, and one document no one else even knew existed. As I held both in my hands, I reached for my phone and dialed Thomas. When he answered, I said only one sentence. "I think it's time we rewrote everything." I think it's time we rewrote everything. There was a brief silence on the other end of the phone. Then Thomas answered in the same calm voice he'd always used. "I'll clear my schedule tomorrow morning." "I appreciate that." "Harold." "Yes. Don't make this decision because you're angry." I looked around my study. The room was filled with framed family photographs. Daniel holding his first baseball trophy. Melissa wearing her high school graduation cap. Linda smiling beside me on our 25th wedding anniversary. Every picture captured a moment when I believed love was enough to keep a family together. "I'm not angry anymore," I said quietly. "What are you?" I took a long breath before answering. "I think I'm finally awake." The next morning, I drove to Thomas's office carrying a small leather folder I'd owned for years. Inside were documents that represented an entire lifetime: property deeds, investment summaries, insurance policies, business records, and the original will I'd signed 8 years earlier. Thomas spread everything across the conference table. "So," he said, "before we change a single word, tell me what kind of ending you want." That question surprised me. "I thought you'd ask who should get what." He smiled. "Money is the easy part. Legacy is much harder." I leaned back in my chair. "I don't want my family destroyed." "I know. I don't want anyone humiliated." I know. I don't even want revenge. Thomas folded his hands. So what do you want? I stared out the window for a long moment. I want the truth to matter. He nodded slowly. Now we're talking about something much bigger than a will. For the next 2 hours, we discussed every asset I'd spent a lifetime building. The house. The lake cabin Linda and I bought after 20 years of saving. My retirement accounts. The investment portfolio from selling my construction company. The antique pickup truck my father left me. Even my old toolbox. Every item carried a memory. Every memory reminded me why I'd worked so hard. Not to become rich, but to make life easier for the people I loved. Thomas eventually pushed the paperwork aside. Harold, let me ask you something. Go ahead. If none of this money existed, which members of your family would still be sitting around your table every Sunday? The answer came so quickly it frightened me. Michael. Without hesitation. Then Emma, my oldest granddaughter. Maybe my youngest grandson, Noah. The list stopped there. Thomas noticed. You answered that without thinking. Because it's true. He slid a blank sheet of paper toward me. Then perhaps your estate shouldn't simply reward blood. I looked at him. It should reward character. Those 4 words settled over the room. Reward character. Not titles. Not expectations. Not birth order. Character. Suddenly, the entire purpose of my will changed. Until that morning, I'd been thinking about dividing money. Now I was thinking about preserving values. What if? I began. Thomas waited. What if the inheritance wasn't automatic? He smiled. What do you have in mind? For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than disappointment. I felt clarity. I spent the next hour explaining exactly what I wanted. I didn't want anyone punished out of bitterness. I wanted every decision to reflect the values I'd tried to teach my family my entire life. Respect. Responsibility. Compassion. Integrity. If someone had truly cared about me, not my money, that should matter. If someone had only appeared when they wanted something, that should matter too. Thomas listened carefully, occasionally making notes but never interrupting. Finally, he looked up. This won't be an ordinary estate plan. I don't want an ordinary ending. By late afternoon, the first draft was complete. We reviewed every page together. Most of the document looked familiar. The assets were the same. The beneficiaries were mostly the same. But buried within those pages, one carefully written clause changed everything. One sentence. Simple. Legal. Perfectly enforceable. It wouldn't create a family war. It would simply ensure that the people who valued relationships over wealth would never be treated the same as those who valued wealth over relationships. I read that sentence 3 times. Each time, I became more certain. This is the one. Thomas placed the document in front of me. Once you sign it, there's no going back. I picked up the pen. For a brief moment, I thought about the young man I'd once been. The father coaching little league games after 10-hour workdays. The husband working weekends so Linda could stay home with the children. The businessman who believed success meant leaving his family financially secure. I realized something in that moment. Money had never been my greatest gift to them. The example I tried to set was, if they had chosen not to follow it, that wasn't something money could fix. I signed my name. Thomas added his signature. 2 witnesses entered the room and signed theirs. Just like that, 8 years of estate planning became history. As Thomas carefully locked the new original inside his office safe, he looked back at me. How do you feel? I thought about that honestly. Lighter. Because you protected your money? I shook my head. No. Then why? Because I finally stopped protecting people from the consequences of their own choices. Thomas stood and extended his hand. I think that's the healthiest decision you've made in a long time. Life outside my lawyer's office continued as though nothing had changed. Cars passed. People hurried to lunch. The world kept turning. Only I knew that a single signature had quietly rewritten my family's future. When I arrived home, Linda greeted me with an unusually cheerful smile. Where have you been all day? Oh, I replied casually, hanging my keys on the hook by the door, just taking care of a few old matters. She studied my face for a second. What kind of matters? I smiled. The kind every man eventually has to take care of. She nodded, apparently satisfied, and changed the subject. But later that evening, as I walked past the den, I noticed Daniel's name glowing on Linda's phone screen. She answered immediately and lowered her voice. Yes, she whispered. He was gone most of the day. There was a pause. Then she said something that made me stop cold without letting them know I was listening. I don't know exactly where he went, but I think we're running out of time. I quietly continued walking down the hallway. They still believed they were planning ahead. They still believed I was completely unaware. Neither of them realized that the future they were racing toward no longer existed. After that phone call, I stopped wondering whether I was imagining things. I wasn't. The whispers, the sudden interest in my finances, the carefully timed visits, the fake concern. It all fit together now like pieces of a puzzle I'd spent months trying to solve. The strange part was, instead of feeling angry, I felt strangely calm. When you finally accept the truth, it loses some of its power to hurt you. From that day forward, I made one simple decision. I would live exactly as I always had. I still mowed the lawn on Saturday mornings. I still met my friends for breakfast every Tuesday. I still took my granddaughter Emma to lunch once a month, just the two of us, where she spent more time telling me about her nursing classes than looking at her phone. She never once asked about my money. Not once. She asked whether I was sleeping well, whether my knees still bothered me, whether I remembered to take my blood pressure medication. When someone genuinely loves you, they worry about your health. When someone loves your inheritance, they worry about your paperwork. That difference became impossible to ignore. The months passed, and my family grew bolder. Daniel began talking as though certain decisions had already been made. You know, Dad, eventually, the house will probably need renovations before it's sold. I looked at him over my coffee. Sold? He chuckled awkwardly. I mean years from now. I smiled. Of course. Melissa started sending me brochures for senior living communities I had never asked for. This place has 24-hour staff. This one has medical care. You'd have so much less to worry about. What she really meant was obvious. If I left the house would become easier to divide. Even Linda changed. She became unusually agreeable. She cooked my favorite meals, asked if I wanted dessert, suggested weekend drives together. Months earlier, I would have been grateful. Now I couldn't help wondering, was she trying to repair our marriage? Or repair her chances of staying in my good graces? The hardest part wasn't watching their greed. It was questioning every act of kindness. One evening, Michael stopped by unexpectedly carrying 2 bags of groceries. I noticed you hadn't been to the store. I was planning to go tomorrow. I know, he said with a smile. But I had time today. We spent an hour putting everything away. He fixed the loose cabinet hinge I'd been meaning to repair. Changed the batteries in my smoke detectors without saying a word. Then we sat on the porch as the sun disappeared behind the trees. You seem different lately, he said. Different how? Quieter. I laughed softly. Maybe I'm finally learning that not every thought needs to be spoken. He looked at me for a long moment. You know, Mom and Daniel have been acting strange. I stayed silent. I don't know what's going on, he continued, but if anyone's making life harder for you, I hope you'll tell me. There it was again. Not a question about money. A question about me. I placed my hand on his shoulder. When the time comes. He nodded before I even finished. I'll be here. I believed him. That night, after Michael left, I unlocked the drawer in my desk and removed a thick envelope Thomas had prepared. Inside were several handwritten letters. One addressed to Michael. One to Emma. One to Noah. And one addressed simply to my family. I'd rewritten that letter more times than I could count. Not because I wanted the perfect words. Because I wanted honest ones. No insults. No bitterness. No score settling. Just the truth. I placed the envelope back into the drawer. Its time hadn't come yet. A few weeks later, another unexpected event confirmed everything Thomas and I had suspected. I woke early one morning and walked into the kitchen for coffee. Linda was already there. She quickly turned her phone face down when she saw me. "Morning," she said. "Morning." She seemed nervous. Far more nervous than usual. About an hour later, she announced she was meeting Melissa for lunch. Nothing unusual about that. Except she'd forgotten her tablet on the dining room table. It buzzed several times after she left. Normally, I would never look. Privacy matters. But something told me this wasn't ordinary. The screen lit up. A message preview appeared. "Daniel, did he say anything after seeing the doctor?" Another message arrived almost immediately. "Melissa, if his memory keeps slipping, we need to move faster." I felt my pulse slow instead of quicken. Interesting. Very interesting. I hadn't seen a doctor in over 4 months. And my memory wasn't slipping. Someone was creating a story. I set the tablet exactly where she'd left it. When Linda came home that afternoon, I acted as though nothing had happened. Because people reveal more when they think their secrets are safe. The following Tuesday, I met Thomas again. I showed him the messages I'd written down from memory. He listened carefully. Then he opened a legal notebook. "I was hoping I was wrong," he admitted. "Wrong about what?" "They're laying the groundwork." "For what?" He looked directly into my eyes. "If they can convince enough people that you're mentally declining." He didn't have to finish. I already understood. Question my memory. Question my judgment. Question my ability to make legal decisions. And eventually, question the validity of the will they'd never find. Thomas closed his notebook. "They're assuming you're reacting emotionally." "But I'm not." "No." He smiled. "You're reacting patiently." He reached into his briefcase and slid one final sealed envelope across the desk. "I think it's time." I looked down at it. "What is it?" "The last piece." I slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a single certified document. As I read the first page, I couldn't help smiling. It was exactly what we'd been waiting for. One legal safeguard. Completely confidential. Perfectly timed. If anyone ever tried to claim I wasn't of sound mind, that document would destroy their entire argument before they finished making it. I folded it carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Thomas leaned back in his chair. "They think they're preparing for the reading of your will." I smiled. "They have no idea," he finished my sentence, "that they're actually preparing for the reading of their own character." And somewhere across town, my family continued making plans for an inheritance they believed was already theirs, never realizing that every lie they told, every whispered conversation, every calculated move, had already been quietly answered by one sentence they had never seen. 8 months later, I sat alone on the back porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the sky the same shades of orange I'd admired for decades. People often imagine that the most important day of a person's life is loud. Mine wasn't. It was wonderfully ordinary. I watered the flowers Linda used to love before everything between us became complicated. I waved to my neighbor as he walked his dog. I called Michael just to ask how his week was going. Then Emma stopped by after her hospital shift with 2 cups of coffee because she knew I liked mine stronger than anything sold in a cafe. "You look happy today, Grandpa," she said. "I am." "Anything special happen?" I smiled. "I finally stopped carrying something that was too heavy." She laughed softly. "I have no idea what that means." "You will someday." She hugged me before leaving for work. It turned out to be the last conversation we ever had. 3 weeks later, while sleeping peacefully in my own bed, my heart simply decided it had worked long enough. There was no drama. No suffering. Just the quiet ending to a long, hard-working life. That's how I wanted it. I often wondered what happened after I was gone. The answer, as Thomas later wrote in his notes, unfolded almost exactly as we had expected. The funeral was beautiful. Friends from 40 years earlier came to pay their respects. Former employees spoke about the opportunities I'd given them. Neighbors shared stories my own children had never heard. Michael cried openly. Emma stood beside him holding his hand. Daniel, Melissa, and Linda accepted condolences with practiced smiles. But according to Thomas, Their attention wasn't entirely on the service. More than once they quietly asked him when the family would be meeting to discuss the estate. He simply replied, "Everything in its proper time." 5 days later, everyone gathered in Thomas's office. I could picture that room perfectly. The long walnut table, the leather chairs, the shelves lined with thick law books. The same conference room where I'd signed the document that quietly changed all of their futures. Thomas began exactly as he always did. "Your father loved each of you very much." No one spoke. He reviewed a few routine matters. Insurance, taxes, business accounts. Everything proceeded exactly as everyone expected. Daniel leaned back confidently. Melissa occasionally glanced at Linda. They were relaxed, certain. Then Thomas reached the final section. The last will and testament of Harold Whitmore. The room became silent. He turned one page, then another. Finally, he looked up. "There is an amendment." Daniel frowned. "An amendment?" "Yes." "When was that added?" Thomas answered calmly. 8 months before your father's passing." Linda's face changed almost instantly. "I don't remember him mentioning that." Thomas looked directly at her. He wasn't required to. A silence settled over the room. Then he continued reading. The first few gifts remained exactly as everyone expected. Personal belongings, family keepsakes, charitable donations to the local veterans organization and children's hospital. Daniel looked relieved. Nothing unusual. Not yet. Then Thomas reached the clause. "The remainder of my estate shall not be divided equally by default. Instead, it shall be distributed according to the provisions outlined in the accompanying statement of intent and the conditions attached to this amendment." Melissa interrupted. "What conditions?" Thomas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened another sealed envelope. "The conditions your father personally reviewed, signed, and recorded with independent witnesses." Daniel shifted uneasily. Thomas continued. "My father believed that inheritance is not a reward for being related to someone. It is a reflection of the character shown while that person is still alive." No one moved. The sentence hung in the room. Heavy. Unavoidable. Then came the part they never saw coming. Over the previous 8 months, I'd quietly established gifts during my lifetime, documented acts of care, and created a charitable family trust that would be managed by the people who had consistently demonstrated compassion rather than entitlement. Michael was named trustee. Emma was appointed successor trustee. The lake cabin would belong to them jointly, provided it was never sold for personal profit but remained a place where future generations could gather. Substantial donations had already been arranged for organizations that had helped veterans, trade apprentices, and struggling families, the very people I'd spent my working life alongside. The antique pickup truck went to Noah because he had spent 3 summers helping me restore it without ever asking what it might be worth. Daniel and Melissa each received a personal inheritance. Not enough to change their lives. Enough to know they had not been forgotten. Enough to understand they had not been trusted. The room remained completely silent. Then Daniel finally spoke. This isn't what Dad wanted." Thomas calmly placed another folder on the table. Inside were medical evaluations completed shortly after the will was amended. Independent specialists had examined me thoroughly. Every report reached the same conclusion. Excellent memory. Sound judgment. Full legal capacity. Thomas spoke before anyone else could. "Your father anticipated that someone might one day question his competence. He wanted to ensure there would never be uncertainty." Linda slowly lowered her eyes. For the first time, no one had an argument. No one accused anyone. No one raised their voice. There was simply nowhere left to hide. Then Thomas picked up the final envelope. Across the front, in my handwriting, were 4 simple words. "To my family." He unfolded the letter and began reading. "If you're hearing this, then my journey has ended, and yours continues. I hope the first thing you remember isn't what I left behind, but who I tried to be while I was here. If you're disappointed today, don't blame a lawyer. Don't blame a judge. Don't blame your brother or your sister. Ask yourself one question instead. When was the last time you visited me simply because you wanted to spend time with me? When was the last conversation that wasn't about my house, my health, my accounts, or my future? I spent my life building a family, not an inheritance. Some of you protected the relationship. Some of you protected your expectations. Those are not the same thing. The greatest wealth I ever possessed wasn't in my bank accounts. It was the opportunity to discover who truly loved me before it was too late. For that gift, even though it came through heartbreak, I am grateful. According to Thomas, no one spoke for nearly a full minute after he finished. Silence has a way of saying what words cannot. Later, Michael told him something I'll never forget. He said, "Dad didn't change the will to hurt anyone." Thomas smiled sadly. "No. He changed it to tell the truth." "Exactly. Not revenge. Truth. Because revenge leaves scars. Truth leaves choices. Long after the money is spent, after the property changes hands and the paperwork is forgotten, people still have to live with the way they treated someone who loved them. If my story has taught you anything, I hope it's this. Never wait until someone is gone to show them what they meant to you. An inheritance can be counted. A legacy cannot. And sometimes, the most powerful sentence a person ever writes isn't the one that gives away their wealth. It's the one that reveals the value of a human heart.